What is going on, everybody? Happy Monday and happy Memorial Day to all of our American listeners and viewers here today. I'm your host, Shad Dales, and thanks for checking our latest Tree to Black podcast. Got an interesting podcast here today. I don't know if you guys have actually paid attention over the last couple of weeks involving MediPharm Labs and a public forum, a shareholder vote that's coming up on June 13th involving Apollo Capital and how they want to replace the existing board at MediPharm Labs. Why? Well, they've reported 21 straight quarters of losses, and some of the compensation of their current management has taken over a third of their market cap, and it's mind-blowing to think of what this company has turned into. This is once a darling in the space. So, yes, we're going to highlight a few things outside of this interview about the industry and what we can anticipate this week going on in Texas. But most importantly, we want to dive in as we got two board members or potential board members logging on here today to basically give us a lay of the land on what we can expect heading up to the shareholder vote on June 13th and really the future, because it's a defining moment for a once darling in the space, MediPharm Labs. So with that, let's welcome in the CEO of Apollo Capital, Regan McGee. First time to the podcast. This should be interesting. How are you, sir?
I'm great, thanks. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate it. I know you guys are big fans of the show, and I appreciate it. Let's also welcome in John Fowler. He's actually the president of Muskoka Grown, but you're actually on the slate for Apollo to be one of the board members of MediPharm Labs, formerly of Supreme Cannabis as well back in the day. But everything that's old is new again. First time to the podcast. Good to meet you. How are things?
Thanks for having me. Things are good, and really appreciate what you guys are doing. There's not a lot of folks that still cover the space, and I'm a regular watcher to keep understanding what's going on.
Well, I'm not going to lie. I just talked to some people that haven't seen me in 4 or 5 years. They're like, you're still in cannabis? And I'm like, yeah, actually, if you don't follow the space, it's funny how the Canadian market is actually turning around. The sentiment's changing, and there's some positive stuff for certain players, but obviously not the company you guys are involved with, and obviously trying to make changes. But with that, Regan, let's get into it. As I said, there's been a lot of attention that we've been following, and we will start with the obvious. Shareholders have seen here at MediPharm Labs over $1 billion of shareholder value that's been destroyed under the current board, which is clearly not good. As I said off the top, they've reported 21 consecutive quarters of losses with no clear path to profitability. So first up, how'd we get here?
Well, it's an interesting story, actually. As you said, this is one of the darlings. There was so much opportunity.
Big time.
This is a company that everybody was talking about how it had no debt, essentially, how it actually owned its real estate. It had licenses that were valuable. Like this company could have been something absolutely phenomenal. As you said in your opener, though, just in the last 3 years, just the top 3 paid executives in the company took out more than a third of the company's market cap in pay for the top 3 executives.
So what was market cap and what was the pay? What did that total?
It's 30 million market cap. They've taken out over 10 million in pay. The CEO, David Pittick, has taken out 5.6 million in pay in the last 3 years. I mean, it's absolutely staggering. Every quarter it's losses on top of losses, and there's no plan to turn it around. So we want to go in there and actually grow something of value for the shareholders in this company.
How have they allowed this trend then to continue? That's at the end of the day, you can see how, like, is it just a situation where some executives just want to continue to get paid regardless of what's going on with the business?
Yeah. So the current, just the top 3 reporting insiders have taken a third of all of the stock that's been issued in the last 3 years, and shareholders have been diluted by 47% in the last 3 years. Yeah. So the current CEO has only been there for 3 years, is now the biggest shareholder in the company. And so they're just voting to keep themselves in. It was a takeover that happened that I guess nobody was really paying attention to. And now everybody's looking at it now, and the company's got 6 months of cash left, and everybody's going, oh my God, what the hell do we do? Because the company's about to go bust.
Wow. Well, with that, I know, John, as he said, Regan, right now, the company, as I was reading, has $3.3 million, or should say $3.3 million loss in Q1. They have $8.4 million in cash. And from what I've read, current burn rate, that they would probably run out of money by November. Am I reading that correctly, John?
Yeah, that's certainly what we see in the most recent financial statements. It was almost a $6 million cash loss last fiscal year in 2024, just over $3 million in Q1. That also included a $750,000 deposit that was kept for an aborted M&A transaction. So that would have been over a $4 million loss if you take that out of the financial statements. At this point, cash is king. As you know very well, capital is hard to come by in this space. It needs to be preserved. And I think there's a lot of great things going on at MediPharm for the future around their medical business and their pharmaceutical business. But the reality is, if the cash isn't in the bank to get shareholders there along the way, no shareholder is going to enjoy that upside because it's going to go to somebody else or get wound down before that.
Wow. How has this trend lasted as long as it has? And I that's the mind-blowing thing. Like, how has this not been, I'm not going to sit here and say it hasn't been addressed. There's obviously been concerns for a number of shareholders for years, I would think. But how does a company like this allow something like this where the trend continues as much as 2-3 years? And that's a question for either one of you.
I mean, I'd love to take that. So I'll give you a bit of background. So I first met David Pittick, the CEO, last October.
Okay.
And he was looking to get, sort of partially cashed out and looking at kind of alternatives for himself in the future. And a few months ago, I actually offered him $2.5 million to walk away, to buy out part of his position. I offered one of the other board members $1 million to buy out part of his position as well.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I offered to put almost $3.5 million into the company in cash, clean cash, no discounts, no warrant coverage, no board seats, no covenants, nothing, clean cash into the company. And as you both just said, cash is king right now. And they said no. And so that tells you everything.
Why though? Why in a situation like that?
One of the board members told me that they met as a board and they decided that they wanted to entrench themselves, and they thought they could just get more money for themselves if they stuck in place. So there's no notion of actually growing shareholder value. Nobody cares about that that's in the space. And for me to be in the position that we're in right now, we've put almost $3 million now into this, and there's no guarantees. I mean, they've sent us letters saying they're not going to count votes that are going to us at the shareholder meeting. Like, it's absolutely crazy. I've never encountered anything like this.
So Regan, what kind of leverage do you have? You own 3%, is it, of the company right now? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. But every single shareholder we're talking to, they're furious. I mean, they're sitting there going, "You've lost 99% of our shareholder value, and we want change." But the challenge with a widely held stock like this, it's 49,000 retail shareholders. Who's going to put up millions of dollars of capital to try to oust an entrenched board and put in a team that's actually going to grow this thing?
When I was reading some of the late press releases, their CEO, David Pittick, as you said, John, the future has never looked brighter. So what am I missing here? And how are we getting away with this?
Yeah, so I mean, we've gone back over the last few years of press releases going back to 2022. We've been able to identify at least 14 different times where management in their quarterly or other press releases has said that he's just around the corner. Most specifically, they did a big M&A transaction in 2023. This was supposed to be, the blockbuster deal, bringing in revenue, expanding the asset base. They promised specifically positive EBITDA and positive cash flow in the first half of 2024. Q1, Q2 rolls around, we see negative EBITDA and significant negative cash flow. And of course, management never acknowledged the failure. Look, this is a tough industry. You're not going to meet every projection you put out there. But what seems to be happening is these statements are made and there's no accountability for the miss. In that same time period, management's getting excessive equity awards. And the way their program works, the lower the share price, the bigger the equity award. That means that David Pittick, the CEO, has become the largest single shareholder of MediPharm without ever putting a dollar into the company. In fact, taking a large cash compensation. We've also seen in the same period that discretionary cash bonuses have been paid out for various transactions or other, who knows what those are paid for. We don't get any disclosure as shareholders. So all in, it really is a concerning time for the business. And perhaps most concerning is the recent change over the last the year end and the first quarter, a change to focus on adjusted EBITDA. So I think we all know adjusted EBITDA really is one of the most bullshit metrics in the industry, in any industry. And what we have here is they're, I think, trying to mislead shareholders about the health of the business. In the fourth quarter for their fiscal year end, they celebrated an $8 million improvement to adjusted EBITDA from effectively -9 to -1. I had to read that press release, the title 3 times. I thought they were actually profitable. When you dig in, you see there's still, I think it was a $10 million operating loss, almost 11 for the year, and I think a $6 million cash burn. You go ahead to Q1, and it's much of the same. And management's actually stopped talking about profitability. Now they only talk about adjusted EBITDA and hides the real financial state of the company.
So, John, you used to run a cannabis company, and you still do now, being a president of Muskoka Grown as well. What is going on exactly as far as some of the missteps that they've done from an execution standpoint?
So I think MediPharm is a really interesting company, and my history goes back to the early days. I actually tried to acquire the business a few times when we were at Supreme because we believed in what the team was building.
Yeah.
It was probably the first pure play medical company. They were focused
Yeah.
on oils. They were focused on the medical market in Canada, the medical market international. And quite frankly, like many of us in cannabis, I think with the founding CEO, they were early. They were a little bit early into Europe. They were a little bit early into Australia. And unfortunately, when the stocks came down, like everybody, the founder was one of the people let go.
Yeah.
And that's when the current management team was put in place. I think since then, there's really been a lack of strategy and trying to unpack the news releases. It's really hard to know what management thinks because every quarter there's a new kind of focus or shiny toy. But what we've seen is, they made a move, and pretty expensive move, it looks like, into the recreational market in Canada. That's down 60% over the last, call it year and a half.
Yeah.
Is burning cash and really doesn't align with the bigger picture of the company. There's a lot of talk about being a pharmaceutical company. The pharmaceutical line of revenue, while maybe promising in the future, is less than 10% of total revenue over the last few years. Really what they are is a medical cannabis company exporting oils and flower. And even there, we see some really concerning steps. They took the Canna Farms facility, which was one of the best businesses built in the early days of the cannabis industry, a profitable grow asset. Very quickly, that became unprofitable for them, and they mothballed it last year. Now they're selling it for $4 million to Rubicon, who is a competitor. So if you want to compare that, you have a team at Rubicon that's created a profitable business. They've done a wonderful job. They're paid about a fifth of what MediPharm team is paid. Insiders are putting in their own money to acquire this facility for this aided purpose of growing export quality cannabis, the exact cannabis that MediPharm should be growing and exporting. So we see this weird back and forth over the years of transaction value, and management's trying to spin this as being good financial stewards and generating cash. But all we see is a destruction of assets. Assets total are down 20% since David took over. Cash is down 75% from a high of 34 million to only 8 million now. And the reality is, this is a very, very hard industry. Without a very clear focus, good execution, and aligned management, MediPharm or any other company is just not going to make it.
We had Margaret Brody, CEO of Rubicon, on recently after that acquisition. She was saying that facility was worth anywhere between 10 to, or I should say 12 to $15 million that they got for 4. Like, what is this facility, Regan? And it seems like a hell of a win for Rubicon, and like you said, a big loss for MediPharm Labs. So what happened here?
Yeah, we've heard the exact same thing. We've heard it's worth about 15 million, and MediPharm is putting out press releases. They sold it for 4.5. And so we're saying, where's the missing $10 million, especially considering what we're seeing with the active misrepresentations to the shareholders, the insider dealing. There seems to be $10 million missing. We have a lot of respect for Rubicon. I think they're a phenomenal company. I think they're doing really good things. I think they've got really good people running it. And they're a model for what MediPharm could and should be. And the reality is MediPharm is actually better positioned, but Rubicon's now leapfrogged them. In terms of why this has been sold, it's absolutely crazy. You look at the $58 million of operating losses at MediPharm in the last 3 years. Just think about that, $58 million of operating losses. And the only times there's been cash coming in, it's when they're selling key strategic assets. And they sell key strategic assets to pay themselves. I'll tell you what our biggest fear is. We're worried that by the time we actually replace the board, there's nothing left. There's nobody that's on the board of MediPharm right now, or that they're putting up for election, that has any turnaround experience, any experience really growing companies. And we have really great experience. I mean, John Fowler, who's here right now, he sold his company for almost $500 million in cannabis. He's turned around successfully multiple cannabis companies. Like we have a team that knows how to do it and then wants to do this. And our fear is that the shareholder meeting coming up on June 16th with the voting deadline of June 13th. By the time that comes, is it gone? There was a press release that went out today that's just total BS. It's just a smokescreen. Like there's nothing there.
Well, timing's a lot of it right now. And there's a lot of people that made a lot of money in the early days of cannabis industry. Is the timing now, like if you get what you want, is there still time on your side to get this story turned around, Regan?
Yeah, but it's getting harder and harder. When I first spoke to Piddick last October, I think the public disclosures were that there was something like 18 million or something of cash. And he used to say, well, we have 20 million of cash. And I was like, okay, there's enough capital. We can turn this around. I tried to put in more capital. He didn't want it. He refused it. because he thought that it might lead to him being replaced as CEO or something. And so, yeah, it's concerning right now. They, as we've discussed, they actually burned over $4 million in operating losses just in Q1 of this year. And we look at Q2 and we expect it'll probably be 5 million maybe. Yeah. And, the Q1, at the end of Q1, they had 8.4 million. We think there's probably less than $4 million at the end of June. And so this company, I mean, it's very serious insolvency risk. And so, yeah, we have to turn it around fast. So we put a plan together where we have like a 100-day plan, a 3-year plan, and we need to turn this around very quickly. Otherwise, it's going to go to zero.
John, when I see David's resume, like this is the former president and CEO of Purdue Pharma. You ever heard of them? Yeah, right. But you would think, and I when I look at this company from the early days, it looked like this was going to be a massive buyout for a pharma company, with everything that they were doing, and they were ahead of the game. So where was the ball dropped here? Like, you have somebody that just wasn't in senior management. He was the former CEO of Purdue Pharma. And that's attracting some top end talent with a heck of a lot of network involved in this. So what happened here? What got missing?
So look, I think we've seen pharma people come and go, and I'll let Regan speak about the specific problems we have with Purdue and Pittock's track record. But the reality is, if you think about the pharmaceutical business, it's a very high margin business. It's driven by patents and market authorizations that yield a very high, generally long-term, high margin business on the back end. The medical cannabis business, although it's pharmaceutical in nature in Europe, doesn't have nearly the same economics. This is a lower margin. It's about grinding out. It's about getting in touch with patients. It's about getting in touch with pharmacies and really running a lean and mean operation. That's something that we've done successfully at the business where I'm at now, where we've turned effectively 100% of our business towards the international market. It's a pennies business. It's not about 80, 90% gross margins like pharma. We're happy if we grind out a 30% gross margin. We're over the moon. And we've worked very hard to get that. So I think, really, when you look at a lot of the pharmaceutical people who've come into the space over the years, a lot of them haven't succeeded because this isn't the pharmaceutical business. You have to understand the licensing. You have to understand the medical supply chain. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, this is a lower margin, high volume business. And you got to be able to grind. And your whole management team has to be able to grind. So when we look at MediPharm running 54% of revenue into SG&A, we just look at a business that can never be profitable. I mean, the gross margins around 30%. You can't cover that amount of management expense below the line and hope to make it work. So I think that's, a fundamental problem with a lot of the pharma folks that come in. I think second to that, when you run a Canadian pharmaceutical company, and there's a few board members that have this experience, you're effectively running a small region for a big global firm. The guy who runs the Chicago office of most of these companies is an order of magnitude bigger than the Canadian practice. So in these cases, these are not company builders. These are definitely not turnaround people. These are people that got marketing materials, product, and production from head office somewhere and just had to distribute across Canada. And I think that's another way where I think sometimes shareholders are a little bit misled about what it means to be a Canadian CEO of a large multinational. But really what it comes down to is there needs to be a firm strategy. We think we have it. There needs to be tight execution. And most importantly, there needs to be alignment amongst the senior management team with shareholders. When you choose to be a public company, you choose to take money from shareholders. It's your job to give them a return. And sure, you hope to make your own money along the way. But in this case, we've seen management's been able to make money while shareholders continue to hold in the liquid 7 or 8 cent stock.
Wow. You said earlier that they got in a little too early in the European international market. We're seeing some big growth opportunities for a lot of Canadian cannabis companies based on exporting opportunities, especially in places like Germany and Australia. When I look right now, they have fallen well short of some of their overseas sales. They were supposed to be a growth engine. They fell 18% last quarter alone. So again, if they were in early, what happened?
And this is where, we're trying to piece this together through the news releases. So Australia is a good example. MediPharm's original management team built a beautiful GMP facility there. From what I understand, it's one of the best built in the entire world, super efficient, super ready to service that market. Maybe a little bit early, fine. They ended up selling that asset in 2022, shortly after David took over. So fine, you're getting out of the Australian market. I don't agree, but I don't want to be a Monday morning quarterback there. But then less than a year later, they acquired a company called Vivo, and Vivo had brands and assets in Australia. So within a year, they exited one asset and bought back into what I think is an inferior asset. So that just shows a lack of strategy and a lack of sound capital allocation. And we see a similar thing happening in Europe, where they're kind of in the market, they're out of the market, they're in concentrates, they're in flower, and it's very unclear what they're trying to do. And a good example there is most of the growth that they're reporting in Germany is flower. Flower gets done in their Napanee facility. Again, another beautiful kind of first era GMP build. MediPharm tried to sell that business to a third party, and that raised a lot of red flags for us. Number one, the idea that the third party would give you good service while making a profit, couldn't understand how that's better for MediPharm shareholders. But perhaps most concerning, this third party service provider didn't even have the cash to close the deal. So what level of due diligence was really done when you couldn't even figure out if the company had the $5 million to close the deal, let alone the money to operate the business, where not only is most of the growth coming from, if you look forward over the next couple of years and you look at the multi-billion-dollar market developing in Germany, similar size market potentially developing in the UK, you see France, you see all these other companies coming online. This is a flower-driven market, and they basically are trying to sell their most important flower asset. It really just makes no sense.
Wow.
Can I jump in on that?
There's a lot we can keep diving into, but yes, go ahead.
Thanks. There is so much there. One of the things that John said that I think is really important is that nobody on the board right now or in leadership has any turnaround experience. None of them have ever built anything, and none of them certainly have never turned anything around, which is even harder than building something. When I've tried to get in touch with David Pittick, it seems like he's always on vacation. So I was
going to say that, like, there's a lot of concerns here. Have you had direct contact with these people? Like, what's been some of the feedback and dialogue, or have they ignored you?
So they've totally stonewalled. I've met with Taves, who's the board chair, once on a phone call, and that was it. I met with Pittick several times until I told him that I, was very concerned with the governance and some issues. Now he's totally stonewalled me. All I hear is he's on vacation in Mexico week after week. And, and then when you look at their financial statements, is 1.2 million a year of executive travel and other expenses. I'm going, well, there's, I guess that's why he's always on vacation. And so, to actually turn this thing around and to know the things that John's talking about, you have to actually be there. You can't just be on vacation the whole time.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, let's now focus on action plan. And based on what you guys have said in your public campaign, which includes what you've described, Regan, as a 5-pillar plan, which includes restoring trust, unlocking international growth, and financial discipline. So explain more on what this is and why it should attract, I guess, some of the current shareholders in this company.
Yeah, we need to urgently turn this thing around. We need to, the shareholders don't trust anything coming out of management. Every shareholder we talk to, they say the same thing. They say, thank God you're here. Thank God someone's actually going to hold these people accountable. And we actually have a viable alternative to replace these people. There's no trust. They stopped their earnings calls. The only time they restarted them was the Q1 financial earnings call, about 2-3 weeks ago. And we asked questions. They refused to answer. We put out press release ahead of time asking questions. They refused to answer. They've treated their shareholders just like garbage. There's no engagement. There's no communication. So yeah, restoring trust is by far the most important thing. And then we need to on day one, like I'm talking June 17th, we need to start turning this company around because it doesn't have time left. As we've talked about earlier, this company's out of cash in November. If they sell all of the strategic assets, then what do you have left? And so what we think is very likely to happen is, and we've already received all sorts of alarming communications from the company and their lawyers that where they're claiming they're going to have an illegal election process. If they claim that they've won the election, which obviously we think will be total BS based on the feedback we're hearing, it's how quickly do they start firing everybody that works there, selling assets, and just using the money to enrich themselves and trigger termination pay, change of control pay, all that kind of stuff. This is urgent, and that's why we have a 100-day plan. We have a 3-year plan. We think we can, and these are forward-looking statements, so take them with a huge grain of salt. Yeah. There's no guarantees, but we have a very real plan to get this thing over $1 a share within 3 years.
Okay,
and then that might sound like a terrible,
what's it trading at now? Like
7 cents. So it's a pretty big lift from where it is today.
All right. So you're thinking June 17th, as many as 4, because you have the shareholder vote scheduled for June 13th, and then action plan, if succeeds, you're thinking of basically action plan begins 4 days later, is what you're saying, correct?
Yeah. Voting cutoff is June 13th. Shareholder meeting is June 16th. Action plan, ideally it starts on the night of June 16th. We lock down the company's bank accounts and we start And when I say lock it down, it's so that none of the executives steal any money from the company.
Right.
And then we immediately work on actually restoring and building this company up, because like we're out of time. Like if we're sitting here talking about a proxy contest at the 2026 AGM, there's nothing left.
Yeah. John, you've been nominated as one of the new board of directors. Are you looking to run the company as well?
I'm looking to support Regan, wherever I can. So I'm happy to step in. It's a company that I know quite well, and I really believe in the opportunity. As I said, I spent the last 4 years with a company that's really focused on the same markets in Germany, the UK, and Australia. One of the first pillars of the plan that's been put together by the team is to, really replace management and realign that with shareholders. The team Regan's put together is truly phenomenal. There's some cannabis guys like myself, but there's folks with a range of experience across a variety of industries that have big, turnaround, capital raise, and M&A experience. We've got some really good financial folks on the board, or on the proposed board, where we want to come in and put, discipline, zero-based budget the business. So it doesn't matter that you're spending 10% less than last year or whatever it is. We've got to, bring this SG&A down from over 50% of revenue to under 30% of revenue. And that's not going to happen by, just rubbing around the edges. It takes some real, direct work. And the third pillar is we want to make sure that we're avoiding the fire sale of assets. There may have to be, some sales to raise capital, of course, but we got to make sure, in the case of, for example, the Napanee facility, we're not selling for short-term cash, something that can be providing revenue and profitability to shareholders for the next decade. If we can do all that quickly, we can stop the bleeding, and it gives us time to get back to growth in the international markets and really focus on, what we think is that opportunity to get revenue from, the range-bound $40 million or so it's at now, eventually up over $100 million over the next 3 years, really becoming a global leader in those key European markets that are available today and the European markets that are going to open over the next few years. If we can do that, and we combine that with good governance, good shareholder communications, and bring some excitement and trust back to the stock, so we can take what's working on the P&L and the balance sheet and convert that into the share price, then I think you're going to see, some of the movement that Regan's talking about. And then that gives us a whole host of opportunities in terms of raising capital or M&A to build a bigger, stronger, more profitable MediPharm.
So short-term outcome, as far as prioritize, is new management, new board of directors, and then from there start to improve SG&A, look at potentially raising capital, if I'm understanding correctly. And then from there, it's just all about looking at opportunities from a sales perspective and marketing perspective, and especially in the international market. Yes, Regan?
Yeah, we have capital. We have access to more capital. I've tried to put, $7 million of capital in this company already that they said no to. So, I mean, this company is in desperate need of capital, and it has to happen on day one for sure.
Okay. Have you guys heard from current shareholders and what their feedback's been?
Yes, they're furious.
I don't want to say how furious, but I'm sure there's an endless amount of things to outline on what their frustrations are. But wow, 21 consecutive quarter losses. And what's even more alarming is that there has been no transparency involved. So clearly it seems like management is out of touch with current shareholders, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, they don't seem to care about shareholders at all. It wasn't until we showed up and said that we were going to demand an improvement in the company that they even started re-engaging. But right now, I mean, their press releases are, I mean, they're total nonsense. They're trying to twist things around to character assassinate because they can't answer any questions. It's a total disaster. The company's a dumpster fire, but it had such opportunity. It's so sad.
Yeah,
we can't wait to turn this thing around.
One of our viewers actually writes, "Be careful sinking more money into it." What's your response to say something like that?
Yeah, whoever that person is, they're right. and the reality is, job one actually isn't turning it around. It's getting an honest election. I mean, they've sent letter after letter to us saying that they're not going to count any votes coming to us. They've gone so far over the line that we actually have a hearing on June 10th in front of the commercial list in Ontario, which is a sort of business courts, and we think that the court will actually grant a scrutineer and an independent chair, because what they've done is just so blatantly illegal. And so job one is trying to actually force a lawful election process.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that about this independent chair. This is something that they refuse to. Can they legally do that?
They can, and it's actually unlikely to get an independent chair unless there's something incredibly egregious from the company. And we've received letter after letter saying that there are deficiencies in our filings, the way that it works here is that you have the ability to cure the deficiencies. So you say, okay, what are the deficiencies? And they won't respond. Because there aren't any. And so, they've gone so far over the line that we think there's a very high probability that we're actually going to get a court-ordered independent chair, which should tell you something.
One of our other viewers that listens all the time, David Benz, good to see you. He asks, do they have super voting shares? Your response?
They do not.
Okay. All right.
So the biggest challenge I get where the person's going with that. The biggest challenge is the number of shares that management has granted themselves. We believe that the shares that have been granted to David Piddock are actually unlawful. He doesn't lawfully hold any shares. But the shareholders have been diluted by 47% in the last 3 years, and a third of those shares have gone to just the reporting insiders. So even though they don't have multiple voting shares, there's effectively been a takeover of the company that's happened. And some of the shareholders have noticed it. We've communicated with some of them directly, and they're saying, we're furious. We don't know what to do. There's a takeover that's happening, and we're not, it's not like we're getting a premium or anything. Like Piddock, he's put nothing into the company. He's taken 5.6 million out in the last 3 years. And so not only are they not putting in money at a premium, they're actually taking out money while simultaneously taking over the company. It's staggering.
Well, what we don't want here is the lawyers to win and nobody to win in this situation, but this is a real defining moment, to say the least. Okay, John, looking ahead, June 13th, shareholder vote. What is going to be, needless to say, is going to be a defining moment for the company. So what should investors be thinking about right now as they, prepare to vote? And then again, what are some of the possible outcomes if you do indeed succeed on all this?
Yeah, so I think for shareholders who are in the company, I'd encourage them to think back about what it is that attracted them to the business in the first place.
Yep.
And then asking themselves, who's more likely to get there, the current management or our team? I think there's a lot of really great things inside of MediPharm. They have a growing, or it was a growing, medical cannabis business. They've got some great physical assets. They've got a number of clinical trials and kind of pharmaceutical optionality for the future that could have a lot of value. But all of these things require the company to stay alive to get there. And I think it's really important that shareholders ask, where's the financial discipline coming from? This team has been here for 3 years. They've had 58 million of losses. They burned almost 24 million of cash. To me, it doesn't sound like, change is right around the corner, even though we keep reading that in the quarterly press releases. And I think, first and foremost for us, as Regan said, it's getting a fair election. At the end of the day, if the election's stolen, we can't do anything about that. We will fight tooth and nail for what we think is fair and what we think is right. Remember, we've become one of the largest shareholders of the company by putting actual cash into the stock to buy the shares. The CEO has become one of the largest shareholders of the company while taking over 2 million of cash out of the business. So we are fighting an uphill battle there. And then if we win, you can expect us to move very quickly to start right-sizing the company, to bring the cash burn down, and to start, most importantly, communicating clearly with shareholders. As dissidents, we're stuck with public filings. We don't have nearly the same understanding of the company that the insiders do, obviously. But I think even from that, we've been able to put together a more credible, more achievable plan to get MediPharm back to growth, get it not back to profitability, get it to profitability for the first time in its history, and then convert that into share price appreciation with good governance and transparent conversations with our shareholders. When we win, we want to celebrate that. And if we miss, we want to be held accountable for that as well. It's going to be a tough business and a tough turnaround, but we do think it's there, and we do think that upside's there for all shareholders, including Apollo.
Regan, is there any necessary steps that you're doing to prevent a stolen election, like John just alluded to?
We're spending enormous amounts of money on lawyers. I think we're into this for 3 million now. And just for just one thing, I think that hopefully the viewers appreciate. If the management had taken our 3.5 million of cash plus another 3.5 million into the company, no discounts or anything like that, just imagine what the state the company would be in right now. It would be probably double to triple the share price. There'd be incredible opportunities. There'd be more capital that would follow along beside me and behind me, because they'd say, okay, there's something interesting here. There's more capital being put into the company. And instead, we're sitting here in a multi-million-dollar proxy fight where the lawyers are making millions of dollars. All the proxy solicitors and advisors and everybody else, they're making huge amounts of money. And we're sitting here wondering if there's going to be anything left, or is this just going to be, a burning pile of rubble. That's like, it's staggering.
How many years ago was it again? You said that you offered the money?
This was 2 months ago.
Wow.
So yeah, I offered it initially. I offered it last October, and then I tried to meet with the board. I asked over and over again. I called the individual board members directly. The
And
board
no
refused.
response.
The board refused to meet with me. They said they didn't want to hear what we were proposing. They had no interest. And we heard that back through their litigators, actually, not even their corporate lawyers. And so so we did get a response, and the response was a big middle finger. And this was from a large shareholder who's put money into this company, looking to put another $7 million of cash into this company and help grow the thing. We don't make money unless this thing turns around. There's not nearly enough here to sort of break it apart and part it off. There's almost nothing left. And so we have to make this thing make money for us to make money. It's our job is going to be really hard, but I mean, we still think we can do it, but it's going to be really hard.
So lawyers have a tight grip on what's gone on here as far as messaging, I would say, when you put two and two together at this point of the game. So flip side, what happens if you don't succeed? What then? Are we looking at insolvency?
Well, we're still there. We're still there as one of the biggest shareholders on June 17th, even if they steal the election. So it's not like we're going away. I mean, we will still put ourselves in a position where we demand another shareholder meeting. We will have another proxy contest. It's not going away. So June 17th. It's not like I'm no longer a shareholder or anything like that. And I don't think that the current MediPharm board or their advisors have sort of pieced that together. They have, I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but they have very inexperienced advisors. And I don't think they realize, should they steal the election, June 17th, I'm still there. Yeah. And so it's, what does a win look like from their perspective? I don't think they've thought that through. There is no quote unquote win where they just win the election and I go away. That's just not a thing.
Well, promise me one thing, because this is not far away. You guys, you have a hearing on June 10th, correct?
Yes.
Going to have you guys back on after that hearing for an update. And then obviously, if you get the news that you want, hopefully you do, we'll have you back on here June 13th, and we'll have a reminder of what to happen next, just to let people know about that 5-pillar approach and how plan of action gets into play. So we've had some interesting comments here, and I'm not going to say company names, but in the event that you do succeed here, do you go beyond MediPharm Labs? You looked at a lot of distressed assets right now. Are you seeing what's going on in the American market, and does it grab your attention, Regan?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of interesting stuff we could do. I mean, that's part of what's so sad here. We could actually use MediPharm as effectively a beachhead for a roll-up where we could merge in a whole bunch of other companies. We could get phenomenal profitability. We can dual list it. We actually talked about triple listing it with somebody earlier on a European exchange as well. And I mean, there's an opportunity here to get this thing back up to $1 billion plus company, as long as it's not completely destroyed. So there are other companies in the space that we'd be super interested in. Absolutely.
John, without naming names, have there been internal discussions that if you are successful in all this, specific companies that you have already interest in based on what Regan has outlined?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the reasons I agreed to join Regan in this campaign, I think this is necessary medicine for the cannabis industry as a whole, both in Canada and the US. I think there's a lot of companies where management is no longer aligned with shareholders.
Yeah.
And because so much capital was raised historically, in the MediPharm case, the capital was all raised under the former CEO, Pat McCutcheon, not with David, although they're spending it. There's a big opportunity here to find the core business, strip away to find the profitability. And then, as Regan said, do a roll up. I think a lot about in the Canadian wine sector, like Vincor, which was a Canadian wines roll up, got a successful exit to private equity, the teacher pension. I think if you run a company properly, there's a lot of value. You said at the top of the call here, the Canadian market is coming back. In the short term, we're also looking at, there's a number of private companies we've been talking to through our networks that are profitable, not adjusted EBITDA BS, actually profitable, actually cash flowing companies, primarily in the cultivation space, that could be great candidates to work with us to get a better price for their product in Europe through exports and get some monetization for their assets. A lot of these teams, primarily founding teams, they're 3, 5, 7, sometimes 10 years into the business, and they've created a nice little business, but it's a little business. And I think we can offer them, some opportunities in the short term that builds the cash flow and the profitability of MediPharm. In the long run, I do think there's a lot of big names on both sides of the border that are pretty interesting. But, specifically to MediPharm, I think being a pure play medical company is really important, both for a focus for the team and focus for the assets, but also focus for investors and trying to make a company that institutional healthcare investors can get behind, because there's a very clear, call it church and state separation between the recreational business, which we think is failing in Canada, and the medical business, which has this almost unlimited upside opportunity primarily in Europe.
I know. Germany, man, that was great news, obviously, that they kept the status quo with their government. And yeah, it's amazing just how much the medical market has grown in 12 months, from like 250,000 medical patients to almost 1 million. And yeah, often compare, that's the same as Florida right now. The difference is Germany has 84 million people and Florida has 21. So there's big upside potential. And the great thing, we were in Washington, D.C. back in April. It's a clear, concise message over in Europe. It's medical first, and they're doing things the right way. But they're still 3 to 5 years away. But this is where there's huge opportunities for Canadian players, which is surprising me. What MediPharm is doing is, Margaret was saying that she was over at ICBC a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, because we are in a country that is federally legalized, we're at least 10 years ahead of the competition. So I don't get it, but we're about to find out. So define a moment for the company. But best of luck. Before I let you guys go, have you been following a lot about what's going on in the U.S., John, with the rescheduling process and stuff like that?
A little bit. So I made a decision not to be active in the U.S. after I left Supreme. I did make my first U.S. investment in a really interesting retail company in New York. But generally, I watch from afar. My big picture view, and I say this to Canadians all the time, especially non-cannabis people, it is the greatest trade in the world to exclude America as a customer for cannabis, but also exclude them as a competitor when we talk about global medical cannabis. So actually, I know that may not be the best for all the listeners here, but every time rescheduling and banking and all this gets pushed on, my heart bleeds for the entrepreneurs who I know are having a real hard time. But as a Canadian entrepreneur, it actually makes me excited, because the longer that takes, the longer we have a global market with no American competitors, and the longer that what Margaret said, that Canadian regulatory and asset advantage is going to continue. And that's what we really want to take advantage of with MediPharm.
Regan, you agree with what John just said about the Canadian market?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think one of the challenges, though, is that this 3 to 5 year timeline for Europe, or Germany, which I agree with, is MediPharm won't be around in 3 years. Just at the current cash burn rate, even if they sell all of their assets, they're still out of cash next year. So there is no plan for the company, for management. The company, if they don't sell assets, they're out of money in November. If they sell everything they have, then they're out of money next year. So this 3 year plan thing, where do you get there? The press release they put out today could maybe add $30,000 a year to their bottom line. It's ridiculous. So yeah, our biggest concern is that the timelines don't add up. This company is on fire right now, and it is about to be a heap of rubble. And so we need to get there now to turn it around, because like I said, a year from now, there's nothing left.
Well, I always like to go right down the middle. I don't want to be biased one way or another. And we will reach out to David, the CEO, but it sounds like it's highly unlikely that he will respond. And like I said, his legal team has probably, got the grips on what they can and can't say at this particular time. But
can I ask you, do you mind?
There's numbers and data. I don't know what to say other than the fact that if you've got 21 straight quarter losses, I don't know how you hide around that.
Do you mind if you have David on? I'd love to be on here with him. We could. I think that'd be fantastic. We can answer anything, every single question that comes in, no matter how hard it is. Let's answer everything. Let's be totally transparent.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
Start things off is, did you see the Netflix documentary Painkillers? I don't think that'll start off well. But yeah, interesting things. We got big conversation last week. Did you guys see the news out of Texas regarding hemp at all?
Yeah.
That's caused a lot of controversy from both ends of the spectrum. But look, I look at it, and anytime you have smoke shops that, it didn't open up for the last 18 months, but there were as many as 8,000, and that's more than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. And I'm like, if you want to lay low, that's not a good signal, because that's going to create a lot of attention, but this is going to go sideways. I was somewhat surprised, but I was speaking to Zach George, CEO of SNDL, over the weekend, and he was just like, look, this might seem like short-term pain and people are up in their arms, but this is going to create a massive opportunity for the medical market in Texas, and it's going to mirror something to be similar to Florida. And I can't help but agree with that, because I know some of the concerns were access to veterans, but let's not kid ourselves. If some of these bills, including HB 46, starts to expand more and more, you got 30 million people there. And I don't think this is a good wake-up call, I think, for the industry on both sides of the spectrum. And in a lot of ways, I think, John, in a lot of ways, it's going to indirectly drive attention towards Washington, where we could see some reform. But have you watched or paid much attention to it?
I mean, my Twitter feed blew up when the Texas bill came out, but I mean, it's been my cannabis feeds are all about, hemp derived or non-hemp derived, whatever you want to call that market over the last year. I mean, look, the entrepreneur in me loves that stuff, right? You find a regulatory loophole, you work through it in a way that's kind of the American dream to find a little wedge and open it up. But again, as an entrepreneur, my thing is, I want to be comfortable when I get on a plane. I spent 5 years as a public company CEO lying about what I was doing when I crossed the border. That wasn't exactly fun. And I want to make sure if we're deploying capital, that
it's not easy, is it?
No,
it's not easy.
I'm a lawyer, so I just would say I'm a lawyer and there's no follow-up questions. But, when we compare that to Europe, I know there was some consternation and hand-wringing about the German election, but the reality is the horse is out of the barn on medical cannabis. It's going to continue to grow. It doesn't have the same complexities around, the hemp stuff that comes or goes. So, again, my heart goes to the entrepreneurs who jumped in and built a business, but the U.S. space is far too complex for me and uncertain on a regulatory perspective to deploy real capital.
Fair enough. All right, letting you guys go. But before we go again, June 13th is the shareholder vote, Regan. Anything that shareholders, again, I will remind them on what they can do to prepare. What would you say to them?
They can anytime between now and June 13th, so they can already vote, but June 13th is the last day. They can go to curemedifarm.com and they can read all about how to vote, what the future of this company will look like, and we'd love any of the support that we can get. It is challenging considering how many shares the CEO has issued himself to over. It's a huge number to overcome, but we feel confident. We feel very confident.
Okay. That's good to know. All right. Well, look, whatever the outcome is, obviously we hope for brighter days for the company because, as I said off the top, this was once a darling in the space. But remind us to definitely keep in touch with us, reach out to us any given time. And I think there's a few people just based on the comments here today that they're very, very interested to see how this outcome will be. But we have the hearing on June 10th, shareholder vote on 13th. So we'll have you guys on a couple more times over these next 2 to 3 weeks just to get updates. So best of luck moving forward to both you, Regan, and John. And keep in touch over these next couple of weeks, okay?
Thanks so much.
Thanks, right. Chad. Great being here.
I appreciate it. All right. That was interesting conversation. What was the big takeaway for a lot of you there? And I know I was trying to, talk about some things with regards to the overall industry right now, especially with some of the news that happened in Texas over the weekend. But wow, 21 straight quarters and 10 of their $30 million market cap has been wiped out based on executive compensation over the last 3 years. So to some of you, yes, there's always two sides to a story. 100%. I agree with that. So being full aware and transparency, we're going to reach out to obviously the MediPharm teams, see if they can have some of the conversation too over these next couple of weeks to have them back on. But at the end of the day, the numbers don't lie. And if they're not actually having transparency with their shareholders, that to me is very, very alarming. But I know some of you made some comments about a few other Canadian LPs, but I think it was important to ask some of these questions. If they succeed, is this a trend? Is this a business opportunity that we could see you guys expand and more distressed assets, which they clearly outline? Yes, we're looking at Canada and the US and internationally, but I think this is a wake-up call if they do succeed and a benchmark really for a lot of companies right now in the state that they're in. And really some of the solutions that I think we got to be a little bit more proactive on using a proof of example with other companies on what they can and can't do. And let's face it, there needs to be some changes with some companies in this industry. All right, that wraps things up for today. Got a long one. Obviously, again, happy Memorial Day to everybody south of the border in the U.S. Big night for Anthony and his crew as they're taking on the Panthers. Game number 4. Looks like a sweep. They're going to sweep out Carolina, but he was at the game on Friday, was up with Brady Cobb and a few other friends. I saw Joe Caltabiano in the stands as well. He's the founder of Cresco Labs, former founder, I should say, of Cresco Labs. But a lot of people in the cannabis space that were hanging out at the Panthers game on Friday night. So it should be an interesting one. Cats and 4, says AV, and I think he's right. It's going to be Cats and 4. Let's hope the Oilers can win their other series too. I think that'll be an interesting Stanley Cup Finals because both teams look like they're on a collision course to face each other. As far as later this week, we got Margaret Brody from Rubicon, and great sentiment, to say the least, that both Regan and John were mentioning about Rubicon and being a good company, and more importantly, that acquisition for MediPharms. I know Margaret was on and talked about the Hope Facility BC and said, we got this for a discount. No kidding. $15 million is what Regan said it should have been sold for, but Rubicon, $4 million. You can get an understanding as to why she was so excited to make that announcement last month. So she'll be on Wednesday, 4:00. And we've also tried and reached out to Matt Zorn. Wasn't that an interesting announcement over the weekend, as he's going to be joining the Trump administration, leading the way in psychedelics? But that's very, very promising. So we've reached out to Matt, and I think it'd be great to have him on. But yeah, and then a week from today, mark it in your calendar, Luc Mongeau, CEO of Canopy Growth, is going to be coming back on to talk about their latest numbers. So it should be interesting and get more of his take and vision on where he sees CGC going moving forward. But this man, background, CPG, understands how to execute. So I know a lot of you have reached out and have a lot of important questions regarding this company. But one thing that really interests me from our first interview with him is all about operational efficiency, which he has a background being in the CPG industry. So we'll get some numbers, and then we'll ask him, what do some of these numbers represent here in the short term? And more importantly, how the next quarter could potentially start to come to fruition as far as his overall execution plan. But that should be an interesting one. So next Monday, 4:00, Luc Mongeau from CGC comes on. In the meantime, make sure to scan that QR code. So we got our latest newsletter coming out tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., delivered to your inbox. Gives you all the latest news on the reform and business side of the cannabis industry. And we'll have AV back here on Wednesday at 4 with myself and Margaret. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Memorial Day weekend. Enjoy the game tonight if you're a hockey fan. And we'll see you back here later this week. Thanks, everyone. Well, I liked that one, didn't you? Let us know by leaving your comments below, and stay connected with us here at the Trade to Black podcast. We appreciate you logging on here today and learning more information about where this industry is headed. If you have time, make sure to like, subscribe, and smash on that bell for all notifications, and keep the conversation going by leaving some comments below. We always love to get your feedback. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks again for watching our latest Trade to Black podcast.